Hello and welcome. I received an email response to my registered objection to the sickening charade of a parliamentary committee investigation into fracking that comprised a predictably whitewashed and cosmetically tarted up report, immediately provoking disgust. Of course, I'd expected nothing less than their customary propaganda, tiresome lies and transparent deceit, but seeing it in print tends to fan the flames nevertheless. Clearly, it's pointless reminding MPs that they're voted into office to represent the electorate and not to obsequiously facilitate the rapacious greed of ecocidal gas mining interests. They know what they're elected for, but having been corruptly manoeuvred above and outside the law, they simply couldn't care less. And why would they? After all, they get their fat taxpayer-funded salary for towing the party line while upholding the threadbare facade of representation. Any attempt at genuine community representation is an instant career suicide, which simply won't happen. The treasonous Standing Committee on Environmental and Public Affairs completely ignored the massive and ever-growing body of incontestable evidence confirming the perilous and inevitably ruinous consequences of fracking. This indefensible treason reflects the most malicious contempt for basic human rights imaginable. This committee also conveniently ignored the overarching fact that not one aspect of government has the people's consent to permit this criminal insanity. To the contrary, as the overwhelming majority of Australians, in global lockstep with international anti-fracking groups comprising the fastest growing social movement in human history, fiercely reject this poisonous industry while emphatically denying it social licence. But here again, why should MPs worry about constitutionally mandated lawful constraints when murderous thugs and mobsters run government? Well, they don't, and under the current irredeemably corrupted system, they never will. This criminal corporation, masquerading as government, operates a system of plunder via the mechanism of statute law. It must be noted that without exception, all statute law is founded on the premise of the consent of the governed. This malignant industry has flatly refused public consent and resolutely denied social licence. The criminal effort to violently force this genocide upon the nation against the majority will and in illegal defiance of community demands to cease and desist will eventually face criminal prosecution. Such rampant government criminality is obvious because it's the people that comprise the foundation of government and law, and not public servants. The parasites of political parties, premiers, ministers and office bearers are employed by the taxpaying public to be administrators for and on behalf of the people. None of the above are invested with the authority or lawful remit to override the emphatically stated public demand to ban or preferably criminalise fracking. The unchecked environmental rape of fracking has absolutely no foundation in law. None. Furthermore, all resources without exception belong to the people. None of these resources are the property of elected personnel or any government department to plunder for overseas criminal interests. This includes our perilously limited water resources that we the people absolutely deny being transformed into toxic waste for the criminal ecocide of fracking. Doing this in the driest state, in the driest continent on earth, for a totally unnecessary product is blatant eco-terrorism. It's deliberate genocide. Duplicitous parliamentarians and culpable departmental officials should disabuse themselves of the delusion that this crime against humanity will go unaddressed. Be assured that karma will return all criminal actions and public betrayal with interest. Now, I've written to these soulless ghouls requesting acknowledgement of a non-negotiable instruction from the public directed to public servants to immediately cease and desist all fracking plans and abandon all drilling proposals. I also demanded that they immediately abort all fracking operations. Naturally, I expect their contemptuous silence, but the written communication will again be posted to them as printed registered mail with copies that will remain on file as evidence in future prosecutions. In other words, this will stand as proof that the wider community repeatedly refused consent for this proven ecocide in written lawful instruction. At some point, meaningful justice will be restored and these despicable criminals running roughshod over the people's majority will answer for their evil deeds. And let's make no mistake that the many nefarious actions undertaken by these corporate governments of organised crime are evil in the truest and most virulent sense of the word. As previously reported, these escalating crimes are not limited to the ecocide of fracking, as they continue forcing their toxic tentacles into every aspect of life in a growing litany of malicious crimes against humanity. This relentless criminal onslaught increasingly erodes civil rights and basic freedoms in an attempt to disempower and fundamentally cripple any and all avenues of redress or legal remedy. This corrosive process has been underway for decades, wherein so-called authorities can detain anyone they arbitrarily deem in need of psychiatric supervision. This can target independent investigative reporters questioning such things as the utterly preposterous official account of 9/11, as in the infamous case of the New Zealand government persecuting Claire Swinney. For details, check out Claire's excellent website, Web of Evidence. We never learn of this Stalinist abuse of power because 85% of the world's media is owned by only 5 corporations, ruthlessly wielding their monopoly to enforce their ever-encroaching globalist agenda. Any notion of a free and independent media is a sick joke. At the time of scripting this broadcast, the Australian mainstream media shills are gathering at the trough for their annual orgy of self-congratulation that history will enshrine in the annals of hypocrisy. The Walkley Awards exist for what they laughingly claim to be excellence in journalism. That calls for a redefinition of the word excellence, because the shameful fact is that it's a night of gutless wonders celebrating the unpardonable betrayal of truthful news reporting. Amid the moral vacuum of backslapping and theatrical acceptance speeches, I wonder how many secretly acknowledge the fact that this group makes satanic mockery of truthful reporting. It's no exaggeration to state that there's more journalistic integrity in one page of Claire Swinney's fearlessly truthful website than this fraudulent mob of corporate shills will accrue in their miserable lifetimes. None have comprehensively exposed the environmental disaster currently laying waste to southern Queensland, where the gas frackers now own over 2% of the land and continue to deplete the Great Artesian Basin at a rate it cannot replenish. These socio-psychopathic frackers have forced the evacuation of entire communities unable to live with the unendurable, around-the-clock, year-in, year-out, unbearably invasive noise and toxic pollution. The recent tragic suicide of farmer George Bender bears damning testimony to their relentless and now demonstrably lethal oppression. Many other farming families are compelled to walk away and abandon their unsellable properties with absolutely nothing. Restricted media coverage of this evil has allowed it to flourish unhindered, to say nothing of their censorship of the ongoing Afghanistan and Iraq war crimes. This all thanks to the grovelling compliance of corrupt journalism that positions the loathsome pedophile protecting ABC at the black heart of the media dung pile. Unfortunately, I see no reason to expect anything different in response to the current fracking onslaught here in WA. The cowardly shills masquerading as mainstream journalists will continue to write and broadcast corporate scripted propaganda that expertly disguises fact and distorts truth. Happily, most know better than to expect anything else from these terminally infected institutions, whereby critical thinkers now seek unbiased news from independent, alternate sources. What began as trickle defection from mainstream media has erupted into an unstoppable flood gathering force by the hour. We stand at a pivotal crossroads of historic importance. This extraordinary circumstance has evolved two diametrically opposing points of view mirroring the present state of affairs. On the one hand, it seems the media corruption, vicious oppression and government-driven crime is so rampant as to be irrecoverably out of control and entirely overwhelming. Alternately, it appears the grasping globalists seeking to finalise their long-standing plan of world tyranny incessantly stumble into deeply troubling setbacks, major program impediments and embarrassing public failures. Somehow, I don't think we need to wait long before we learn which of these viewpoints will prevail. Thank you for watching.